Hello friends, it's Hank with an AGR Ambient Glow Radio presentation here at 1 o'clock. Another beautiful day. Thank God for that, no doubt. Thank God every day. Keep God in my heart. I'll get right to it, because what I'm going to be talking about today is a little bit of grapevine assessments. What I've basically been hearing and seeing, little chatter online, also what my expectations are regarding the crop losses that we've seen, economics, political things, and what to do to prepare, because there seems to be a certain mindset that different people have, and this is something that I intend to get into in great detail a little bit later regarding the psychology of the youth in this country. Because, well, actually, let me just go ahead and get this out of the way, because it's a very important point. Essentially, people that were born when I was, right around 84, 86, were the last kinds of people that really knew or had access to the old ways, like hunting and fishing. And, you know, I'm one of the last of the youth that remember the rotary phone. I mean, the rotary phone was on the way out as I was growing up. So I saw during my lifetime a tremendous amount of technological change, and I saw the things that the information age brought, for good or for worse, for better or for worse. Definitely a lot of changes occurred. And what many people of the older generations failed to recognize about my generation and the millennials, and I'll break it down a little bit, is that a generation could have been, it's I think, best characterized about with the idea that that particular generation shares a philosophy and shared many things in their life that kind of coalesced a certain perception about the way the world is and how it functions. So, for example, a lot of people in the older generation are going to identify with the ills of communism, because when they were going through school, let's see, you know, just to talk about my mother's age, she would be in elementary school, I think, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Now, this particular incident had a profound impact on her and many other people of that generation. So what other things were going on in that generation at that time, or the one even that preceded it? So the one that preceded it would have been Woodstock and the Vietnam War and civil rights movements, the duck and cover sort of drills that were seriously anti-communist. So let's put this in a little bit more perspective, because all this ties in. It's very important to recognize. So as we moved into the 80s, we had a generation that had come back from World War II. We were enjoying a lot of technological and industrial advantages, primarily because the rest of the world had been bombed into oblivion. I mean, France at one time had been the cultural hub of the Western world, and many could argue it still is in many respects, but because a lot of France managed to avoid a lot of the devastation from World War II, because they had experienced a lot of things in World War I. I think they did want to preserve their culture. But still, they were dealing with Reconstruction and all these other things. Or the Japanese, for example, they didn't have any kind of film industry. So American culture dominated the world for a long time through things that were produced out of Hollywood. I mean, the only thing that the Japanese could really do, lacking all of the technology and the film studios and everything after the reconstruction that they needed to do, after essentially having the entire country annihilated, first through, the fire bombings, which destroyed all their paper cities, and then the nuclear bombs that were dropped on them. They had to adapt, and they produced cartoons, essentially, that became a mainstay of their cultural institution, I guess. They call it, I think, I don't know. Even their pornography was cartoon, and I think that's where we get hentai and things from today. They come out of Japanese culture, because what they did is they produced what was akin to comic books, because they didn't have the ability to produce film or photography. So the large part of culture was sent throughout the world via Hollywood in the United States. And in the United States, also, there was the big Cold War, so that did really concrete the way that that generation saw the world and saw capitalism and saw communism, because the main fight for them was against communism. They would do such things as far as to traumatize the people, to make sure that the mind control would work. Would be the whole duck and cover thing. They would force, they would sound an alarm and all the kids would run and hide under their desks. So these were the things that that generation really knew, because they were traumatized with it in many ways. And then one of the negative outcomes of that was sort of the greed is good paradigm that we saw popularized in a lot of the 1980s movies, where just by sheer virtue of the fact that it was capitalism, we kind of lost, or that generation kind of lost, in my opinion, the perception or the moral framework regarding money. Because anything that involved money or the accumulation of money, greed is good, because it was anti-communist. So that, for people in my generation, looking at the way that that generation pursued material gain, material wealth, even to the detriment of their environment, of their culture, of their children, was a response to the anti-communist sort of rhetoric and propaganda of the time. So you could say, well, if it's not communist, it's good, greed is good, and without deference to the culture overall, they pursued greed to the point where it was absolutely disastrous and corruptive. Now, as a result of that, and it's very bizarre for me to see people that have enough money, and I use that very loosely nowadays, because we are living in a time of a managed market, which is essentially communism. We have major monopolies that are not broken. We have institutions that are not operating under legal frameworks. We have businesses here in the United States that are not giving any respect or deference to our culture and our foundational principles, which is the Constitution of the United States of America. So you begin to, when these companies and institutions and the very government itself is not obeying their own legal framework, or the legal framework that binds us all as a culture, it's a very precarious position. And I say that that's as a result of the greed is good sort of mentality and philosophy that led us in this direction. So a lot of people in my generation, younger, will have very negative opinions often about capitalism because they've never really been able to experience a free market. They've only been able to experience monolithic institutions, and anytime you would try to start your own business, or you would find that it's either because of the red tape, the legalese, the taxes, the rent, all of these things that are kind of antithetical to starting small businesses. Then you'd have, more legislation would come in, like Obamacare. So it makes it impossible for a small business to start, or somebody to start a small business and still be able to operate within legal frameworks. So of course my generation is going to have very, very negative opinions about capitalism because they're told we live in a capitalist society when in fact we do not. And I think if we were more honest about the actual society that we were living in, we could repair the republic in a very quick way by demonstrating the value of a free market, a competitive market. Because, as I've said before, and I'll say again, the end-all be-all of business is not just to make money. To make money in and of itself is no thing at all. Hi there, good to see you. I'm not sure, I don't believe I've met you before, but welcome. These frameworks, because they've been lied to so much, they're not really sure about what capitalism is. They're told what it is, but they've not had the ability to interact with a true free market. So, I think I lost my way a little bit. I've taken a little aside because, again, I don't think I can belabor that point enough about how confused many people are in my generation and younger about what capitalism is, because they're told they live in a capitalist system when in fact they do not. And I say that it would go a long way to quickly restore the republic to show the benefit of a free market system, to bring about competition. Now, this may or may not be done very easily, of course, because we have the monolithic institutions that are in place right now, but they trip over themselves all the time because they have to maintain a lie or an illusion in order to maintain their power, which requires them to do more censorship and more draconian, totalitarian methods. Because if you tell the truth about the situation that we're in, or the country is in, the people are in, and use the right definitions and terminology to describe the situation, you would have a rapid change, and it would be of great benefit to the country. And that's primarily what this assessment is going to get into, about the precarious position that we find ourselves in and the challenges that we're facing, not only today but in the future, and expectations that I have moving towards October. And just to finish this little point on the aside about the generation. So I was talking about the one regarding greed is good, culture, so on and so forth, of that 1980s sort of framework, which allowed anybody that wanted to make money, it was okay for the executives to offshore the business, thinking in a quarterly way instead of thinking long-term or what was good for their grandchildren or their children, because of that brainwashing that was anti-communist, which led us to kind of a systemic corruption and short-sightedness. I mean, I can still recall hearing many conversations of the generation that directly preceded mine that would essentially throw their own children under the bus if it, got them a little bit more money. So they're always chasing this money without really realizing that there's an entire superstructure or another force at play that is devaluing the very savings and achievement that they're trying to get to. So that causes yet another systemic societal problem, because the institutions, the banking institutions and so forth, the legal frameworks require more and more people to be out of the house. So at first the man has to leave the house, and then after that the mother has to leave the house, and then that leaves no one to watch the kids unless they could be raised by their grandparents or a neighbor or childcare. And while they run out to make all this money, they don't instill the values of the previous generation into the children. So the children basically get handed these electronic devices. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for children to be educated by the television for quite a while. And now what had happened, and this is the distinction that I think it's very important to make. Generations before, having that cultural identity that comes from parents to children, passing on the values, and then it moves along, and then they have children and passes on the values. Well, we entered a technological age where most people were being educated by either the television or the internet and their mobile devices. So because information moves so quickly, not only in the information age, but then the post-information age is what we're in now, the post-information age. I call it the technological age. Some people call it post-ignorance age. There's a lot of different names for it. And I think we can only really get the true essence of the thing once we're out of it. But those revolutions in technology made the difference between somebody that was born in like 86, 84, like I was, which would technically be on the edge of millennial, very, very different from the person that was born in 1990. So I can still remember the rotary phone, but I would be one of the few in the younger generation that could remember the rotary phone. Other people, no idea. And then 1990 is going to be very different than the person that's born in 96. So the generations, when you kind of look at it as a cultural cohesion and the way that an entire society is viewing things or looking at things, you need to understand that there are multiple divisions. So 96 is going to be very, very different than the person that was born in 2000, and is going to be very, very different than the person that was born in 2006, especially the post 9/11 era. So that kind of it's one thing that I need to, I think, to point out to the older generation, because they look at the youth thinking that they share some of the common principles and ideas and critical thinking abilities and capacities that they did when they were younger. But this is not true at all. In fact, I've seen a very disturbing trend with younger kids that really, and I call them kids, but they're 17, 18, 20, 22, 24. Basically what had happened was the parents were out of the household. They handed these children smart devices or telephones, and they went on and they used Facebook. So they're not like when I was a kid, I rode on the bus and I was forced to interact with the kids around me. So I developed interpersonal skills. The kids past that point got on the bus with their headphones in. staring down at their screens. They go to school, staring at their screens. They're at lunch, staring at their screens. They go home, staring at their screens. This is the way that they feel like, and Facebook was engineered to do this, to give them the dopamine hits, to keep them addicted to the system, to feed it more information. Because whether, you want to go down the road of it being a DARPA lifelog project or some other mind control program, I think that's very legitimate to say that that was the purpose of it. But they didn't appreciate the ramifications of mind controlling an entire series of youth, nor did the parents really recognize the danger in this, because they could only see it from their perspective, growing up in a world where these devices did not exist, so they didn't really fully appreciate the danger of that. So these kids really, and like I say, I call them kids, but they're really, about 20, 22 now. They literally do not have the interpersonal skills to understand you. They don't understand gestural frameworks. They don't understand you when you speak to them. They really cannot. It's like, the experiments that were done with the cats. You put a cat in a room that only has vertical stripes. The cat can literally not perceive horizontal stripes because they just don't have that framework of understanding. And you would think, well, how could somebody not understand what I'm saying? How could someone not hear me, take that into their mind, and then be able to respond? This is how maladapted that they are. So there's just, I'm not sure that they can be socialized in any specific way. So I'll give you an example here. Let me pull up an example because I'm very fond of my examples. I'm going to show you a young guy that I was trying to communicate with. And this is, of course, not to bully or harass or berate or anything, because this gentleman has my sympathies. Okay, we're going to take a look here at Nick. And let me find a good video from him. Okay, so he's...
Hi everybody, my name is Joseph Smith.
I
reached out to everybody 2 months ago for help, and in the video I mentioned that in a society of all males governing the government, that they should include other males in their society if they are truly about helping their own gender because in an all-male governed society, one would think that it would make sense for those males to help each other and not exclude people, other males, but to include them. I mentioned this, and a group extended membership to me, and I accepted, and they state that they give $1 million to each member, but they never gave any money to me. And it turned out the representatives online, including people on the Facebook page Rise from Poverty, Rise Out of Poverty, are charlatans and liars and devil worshippers. Because the Illuminati group itself states that you do not have to be of any denomination to be affiliated with their group.
Alright, I'm going to give it a quick pause right there. just to point out that yes, it's going to get a little bit more interesting than this, but it's already pretty interesting. Because I've had a series of conversations with Nick. First, he was concerned he wasn't going to make his rent payment or his electric payment. And I hate to see people suffer. I never like to see anybody suffer. So I'm looking for a way to help him because he's reached out for help, and to the entire world, basically, to people that he doesn't know, because he doesn't feel like he's being included in society. Which makes sense, because when you kind of live in a dystopian sort of world where there's a lot of lies coming from central authority figures, and then you also have poorly educated people and people without interpersonal skills due to the technology, it makes me concerned. I want to help. So I basically had said to him, tell me what your problem with your plumbing is, or what you think it is, and I'll diagnose it from here. It could be generally something very simple, which you can watch a YouTube video or something on repair yourself. Not very often are you actually going to need to dig a trench and pull the pipes out and so forth. So I figured, well, if he has a problem, I'll sit and listen to it and see if I can help him. But he can't understand me. So let's go on here. This is not really the most extreme example, but it's a fairly good one.
Which means it means you can worship whoever you want. You don't have to worship any being or deity or entity or anything. And they also say that they do not require any money of their members, yet representatives of their group that have contacted me have stated that I needed to pay them $200, yet I have no money. I have no money. I have no job. I need some help. I was reaching out for help. They reached back and they said that they would help me, but somebody either pocketed the $1 million in which they owe me for being a new member, or they're liars and charlatans. The government needs to know about this. That government organization, the Illuminati, needs to know about this. That somebody in their organization has lied to me, has lied to this man, whom I am, and I know of who I am. I am the light of God. I have ascended upwards within me, and I have seen myself, and I know of who I am. And not everybody can say that about themselves as who they know themselves to be, but I do. And because I know who I am.
Now, I very much like the idea of people using to use the internet to self-actualize and meet with other people and things of that nature. But there are cults on the internet that have indoctrinated people to certain philosophies. And I want to make this very clear, because this is probably the most important part. I can see what you're saying there. I'm tired of it. You are exactly right. And you say Looney Tunes. But this, unfortunately, is prevalent in our society. And this is something that people do not seem to understand. Especially people in the older generations, or people that are not really aware of what type of socialization, or lack thereof, has occurred for a full generation. But basically what happens with Facebook is people get shunted off into groups that reinforce their normalcy bias, or their cognitive biases. So, like, they kind of go into a splinter groups. like, let's just use a political example. You have a group of Facebook users that primarily interact with, I don't know, environmental causes and other things that you would consider to be typical liberal philosophies. And then they follow liberal political candidates, or say Hillary Clinton. Well, they're down this road. And everything that Facebook is going to suggest inside of that realm is not going to give them a broader perspective. Their bias is going to be continually reinforced because they're not going to see any opposing ideas. And this is extremely dangerous because without that broader context, just like the cat that only sees vertical stripes, they literally cannot understand why Donald Trump would be in office or why other things exist outside of those continually reinforced splinter groups. So when they talk about, when people talk about the division in this country, this is why. Because we have a generation of people that were not properly socialized and that do not have the education or the broader context. They only have reinforcements of their own bias. So when you even go to speak to them, they cannot and may not be able to understand you. Which, it's very clear to you, but they just simply cannot do it. I'll give you another personal example. You go to like I went to order some tacos or some burritos or something from a local establishment. And there's the young kid there that's making the burritos. I have to make sure that ahead of time I list out everything precisely and exactly, very simply, what I need and what is required. And I have to take extra time to communicate precisely. Because if I deviate from that communication, they will not be able to comprehend me. It has to be, when you teach, especially, once you get past a certain age, you don't learn as easily unless you're committed to learning. But still, you can't assimilate languages, you can't assimilate gesture, you can't assimilate interpersonal skills. And I hate really to kind of use this term, but it's almost as if the children were raised by wolves. They're basically feral. They're so poorly adapted. So you have to take extra care not to overload them when you give them a set of commands. And because they have this distorted perception and they're not educated regarding history or their culture or the economic system, then they have a construct that's been continually reinforced that is not real. So you would think they're Looney Tunes, they're living in La La Land. Well, you would be correct in that assessment. We don't have re-education processes to help. We don't have mental health facilities. You could honestly look at Nick and you could say, this is a guy that's crazy, but he's not. He's not crazy. He's just not socialized. He was never socialized. He's essentially feral. All right, let's go back to the video here. Oops. You would think I'm feral because I can't get it right. All right.
The Illuminati, who's supposed to represent the light and to help the light.
I'm going to respond to that comment real quick. I'm tired of it. You say it will only get worse. I disagree. I disagree. There are Um, there are ways that we're already looking at mitigating this. Now, we've seen, you know, the mental health facilities are overloaded. There's already processes in place to help, to use technology to help mitigate this. And now that society is a little bit more aware, which they're really not very aware of at this point, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, is educate people in my generation and older about the severity of what they're dealing with and what they're looking at, because they don't understand. It'd be very easy for them not to understand why the kids don't seem to be responding, why their brains seem melted. Well, of course, you add to that the psychotropics and everything else that they take, because they get depressed. They get depressed because they're not socialized. And they're excluded from society because they cannot integrate into it. So then comes the psychotropics and all the misdiagnosis by the scientists at, psychologists, which I think is a very poor way to deal with the humanities. Of course, behavioral psychology, the science, yeah, you could look at it from a mass sort of, you could see where behavioral psychology works as a science, but as a way to deal with people, to bring about the humanities. That type of socialization is done through conversation, through art, through plays, where, I think even teaching these children, what I call children, but really they're in their 20s, how to act, or Shakespearean plays, things to reintroduce them into things that require them to engage with one another in a famous sort of way, because they're obsessed often with the selfie and themselves, and kind of the socializations that they've seen on television, what makes people popular, and they have grand and fanciful perceptions regarding, like heroic stories and tales, which I think is a very good place to start. So if your community is interested in kind of reassimilating these lost souls, that is one way to do it. And it's not dogmatic, it's not a church, it's not a mental health institution. You're creating the means for people to go out and interact, to absorb their culture, and then to feel famous, and then to disengage. So you can give it to them in small doses. So this would be one way that I would recommend reassimilating the lost generation. But let's go ahead and get on with the piece here.
Of God, which is each other, is meant and supposed to help me, for that is who and what I am. In truth, I'm still awaiting involvement with society. I still have no money. It seems like that they have disappointed me. And they claim that there's only 3 days required between when you begin to when you get money from them. And it's been 2 whole months. There's been no contact, no communication from any of their online representatives. To me, they're liars and they're charlatans and they're devil worshippers until they come through with their word of honor. And they're supposed to be of integrity and upright moral values, of honesty, of integrity. So let this be an awareness achieved now, and help received by me. Now that this message is being said and spoken.
Okay. So I had reached out to him again, and I'd said, Nick, what you need to do if you don't have any money is you can paint, because people hate to paint. If you have no brush, no ladder, no nothing, you can generally go to one of your neighbors and they'll let you paint a fence or something, and then they'll pay you for it. And you can think while you do it. It's not really that hard. You start painting fences, and then from there you can maybe be trusted well enough to enter somebody's home to do interior painting, and you will build a life and a business. These are these kind of short-term solutions that I look at least make sure that they can pay their power bill and have enough to eat. But they honestly believe that it's the government's responsibility to give them money so that they can participate in the economy. That's how they honestly believe that the economy works. They think that you're supposed to get a stipend, and then that's what makes the economy go around, not work. And it's a real shame, because work has been really disincentivized, because there is a collective attack on the middle class. I worked in a bronze forge. I've done many things in my life, but one of the things that I thoroughly enjoyed was working at the bronze forge, because I got to handle different pieces of art. And then through my careful efforts, I could bring what was an ingot into form. And, oh, you are precisely right. I'm tired of it. It is. It's not just socialist programming. It's communist programming. Hillary Clinton came along when I remember these things plastered in my middle school. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, really, it's the parents and having a parent in a household to raise a child. It's how it's been done all throughout human history. Now, we do have a tribalism, or a sense of tribalism in a community, where we do what we can also to add to the development of the people that we expect to be in our community later on. So in that sense, it's sort of right. But that takes an entire village to raise a child really is a communist philosophy. And clearly there has been political, what I would call ideologically subverted political leaders in this country that have moved us into fascism and communism. But it's just not going to work very well with the cultural values of the United States. It's not compatible. That's why I say the political class is kind of lost touch, which puts all of us in a precarious situation. But you're absolutely right. That type of ideology, and I did mention to him, I said, that is a communist philosophy. That's not going to work. You know, they've even gone so far as to start to propagate this thing, this universal basic income, where you're supposed to get some windfall from the corporations and you get your check to participate in the economy. Well, all that does is increase inflation. And my perspective when I talk about work being disincentivized is that I look at a tremendous amount of property that's sitting open in my local community and around the nation, and the prices continue to go up. Wages stay the same. Corporations have this favoritism all people that own property want rent ahead of time, or they have an unrealistic expectation of how much money a business can generate. Because in a real thriving capitalist society, profit is actually kind of a hard thing to make. Profit at this point is all but made impossible because of the regulations and challenges that face small business. Because, like I say, let me get back to the Bronze Forge example. I worked at the Bronze Forge, loved it, bringing things into form. Probably there might not even be a handful of these highly specialized bronzesmiths that exist in the entire world. In fact, the statue that's there at Fenway Park with the batter was, I think, forged by the Bronze Forge that I worked at. Of course, that was before my time, but interacting with famous artists and things of that nature. So a very highly specialized skill set. And when you're working at a Bronze Forge, you are literally putting your life on the line. Because if you don't handle that molten metal properly, you will be injured. Or one particular instance, one particular day, we were lifting a very heavy cast, because you have to create these casts after the wax. You melt the wax out, and then you pour the bronze in, then you break the shell off and finish it. Well, these shells become extremely heavy. I knew that we were not just talking a couple of days of work here. If you lose a cast, you have lost months of work. So I'm holding this thing, and I can feel my sciatic nerve crushing in my back. I've lost the feeling in my toes, yet I will not drop this cast. And so I get paid about $12 or $13 an hour because the forge can't bring in the money. It's not because they're not generous people. It's not because they're not very highly skilled. It's not even because their skills are not in demand. It's that the housing prices and the rent and the insurance, and there's no expectation that you can save. The amount of calories that I would have to consume after a day's worth of work made it so that it actually cost me money to work. That's the level of being disincentivized by the current economic political structure, which is why we have so much joblessness and all this other stuff, because we have probably the most technically skilled generations that have ever existed in human history. We can do so much, but yet those opportunities are denied to us through the superstructure or the legal frameworks that exist only to bloat a particular class. And that's created tremendous problems. So I cannot rationalize being crippled for life, having no health insurance, even though it's something that I love doing. I cannot say I'm going to allow myself to become an invalid through work, because there's no way I could save. Now, if I was an expert, I become an expert, and I have some expectation that I was able to sock away some savings so that if I was injured or I'm ready to retire at 50, 55, I might risk a crippling injury. But the way that things are today, the bricklayer goes out and he is working every single day, throwing the bricks out, the masonry. An excellent job, or setting flagstones, or whatever, painting on high ladders where you could fall off and be injured, or digging trenches. At any time, you could be injured and taken out of the game. And then you have no reasonable expectation of retirement. And then they say that we have a drug problem because, well, these guys go to the doctor, they can't get painkillers or anything anymore. If they don't show up for work, they're fired. They have no savings, and then they're crippled. So our society is moving rapidly towards a group of people that have no interpersonal skills and cannot be socialized because we do not have the plays, the connections to old culture. Like, I've seen many different buildings that are closed up that easily could be auditoriums and stages for people just to go into and perform, and then release their productions locally on YouTube, create these local networks and frameworks to share those types of things, and then create community cultural cohesion and overcome those inabilities to socialize, because everybody's capable of learning and changing. And we can't end up in a society that the workers are disincentivized to work, because the most intelligent of the people in the society have already withdrawn. I withdrew because I saw that there was no future in the work that I was trying to do. And when I had worked in the financial industry, I was encouraged to do things that I thought were not exactly moral, and very simple stuff. Like, I'm not talking about like straight up fraud or anything, but to have a boss say, we want you to start calling people at 7 o'clock at night at their homes. No. People have a certain expectation of privacy. Business is conducted during the day. At 7 o'clock, I wouldn't want to hear from anybody calling me about insurance. And they say, well, that's when you can reach them. Well, obviously, if you can't reach them at a time, then they don't want to talk to you. And from my experience in that business, I went around and saw a lot of different small businesses and different people and all their different houses and all the financial plans. And this was past 2007. So I was able to gather a lot of information about what really people are going through on the street. And then, working in construction and other things like that. So the guy that's at the forge working every day, back hurts, and still getting up and doing it, and making $15 an hour, what type of future does he see? He doesn't see a future. So what is that going to encourage that person to do? Well, I believe it puts us all in a precarious position. And this one simple aside was topic enough on its own. I intended to get towards some through the grapevine assessments from different things that I've picked up, people talking about different chatter and things like that. But I'm perfectly fine to flesh this piece out. I've heard the elderly, or not, I wouldn't say elderly, but the older people in our generation actually discuss things like Bastille. Like, that's the kind of situation that we find ourselves in. And when they throw the brick on the printing press like they have, can we even be certain that there will be a market correction? Because what we have is algorithmic high-frequency trading. So they've lost control of that market. It's not reflective of the real economy. So it's possible that the stock market's never going to fall again. Everybody says, wait for a market correction, wait for a market correction. I've been waiting a decade. This has denied me my opportunity with my youth to purchase a piece of property and make capital improvements and maintain it, and therefore bring more benefit to my community. Instead, we just have property sitting open, and the Central Bureau of Planning tells me that, my rent went up because that's what market price is, which is absurd. It's communism. So, I thought, just a quick aside, it has taken me all the way down this path, but I thought it was very important for you to know about the disconnects that the youth is experiencing and that type of precarious position that it puts us all in. Because I personally don't want to end up in a situation where it's like London and you're going to get knifed down in the street. And I'll just leave you with one little closing thought, a little experience that I had recently. Very early in the morning, probably 4 o'clock, I'd gone out for a sandwich and I was coming back home. And there was a guy that was stopped in the middle of the road, not right across from the street, but very near to where I lived. And he started to flag me down. Well, of course, took my normal security arrangement, went around, so I could get an idea of who or what he was and what he was about. But he had a gas can in his hand, and he had run out of gas in the middle of the road in his truck at 4 o'clock in the morning and was going to walk to a very, very far away gas station. Picked him up, and I took him to the gas station, and he didn't have a wallet, he didn't have any money. And he had given me a story about, how his girlfriend or something kicked him out. Because I do understand the psychology of a hard-working man that does appreciate our American cultural values. And guys, men and women out here that are in my generation still hold those cultural values important. The one that's work ethic, the one that is where if you're not making it, it's your fault. Because you haven't put in enough, you haven't worked hard enough, and they feel guilty. So instead of feeling like he could be honest with me and say, I just don't have any money, because no man that has pride, that works, is ever wants to speak those words, because it makes you feel like a failure. But he wasn't a failure, he's just, the system is engineered and geared to destroy him. So I took him up there, filled his gas can, and came back. So the difference at this point, the choices that we have today are whether or not we're going to engage the people that don't have. Because if I had just blown by him, what I've essentially done is reinforced in his mind that the entire society is against him, just like Nick has it reinforced in his mind that the entire society is geared against him. And when you end up with ostracized individuals, whether their ideology is correct or not correct, it is going to turn them into a security threat. And this is not something that our police forces can handle, because our police forces are not, I think, I don't think they fully appreciate the situation, because they are not being educated on what is going on to a larger extent or to a larger degree. So, local police forces will do things like, you'll invite them out to, talk about something that you had seen. Well, for the police forces to approach you with suspicion, or potentially even under the threat of violence that you've called them, how are we going to do community policing when their budgets are going to get more and more restrictive? So I had outlined to these to the police some things that I had seen. There was a girl that had claimed that she had gotten grabbed outside of this little workout area. Well, if it's right across from my doorstep, I'm going to check it out. There's no doubt about that. So, I went to angle in all the vectors of attack, try and understand why we didn't hear any screams or anything at about 6:30 in the morning, where the attacker could have potentially come from, why she perhaps may have been a victim, and went around and looked for cans and bottles and all sorts of other things came around. ultimately came to the conclusion that she was probably maybe out of sick days. Maybe, she's found herself in a position where to retain one of the few jobs that might be able to pay her bills, that she would go almost to any length, even falsely reporting a crime, in order to prevent being fired. So I could not find a vector or any evidence that would make sense that she would have been attacked. I suspect that she had to probably fabricate something in order to prevent being fired. Just a speculation, but I think a fairly well-informed one. So, but the police come out because, I call and say, well, I want to talk to the detective, because the detective comes by, and I want to see, okay, do they have be on the lookout for? Do they have information about more people maybe have been attacked in the area? Is there a certain type of person that I need to look for? Is there a pattern in the area? Well, I don't get any of that information because I'm not, part of that. We're not getting information from the media regarding that. So, I established a few patrols. The other side where they had a clear view, it was like across a lake. And I figured at 6:30 in the morning, I know people are getting up for work. They're out walking. People are getting ready to get on the bus for school. That entire area would have full visibility. So, I talked to people over there in the patrols that were already established. And we came to the resolution, that it would have been virtually impossible for that to have occurred. Because even the slightest scream would have echoed across the buildings, and you would hear it on the opposite side with the lanai thing in there. So we kind of had to take our own security and make sure that we resolve these things. So when the police came out, they were, I'm not going to talk about their tactics or techniques because it's important for me to really appreciate the value of our security forces and the fact that they are under a tremendous strain with the increased homelessness and all the other systemic problems that we're seeing manifest. And they're the ones on the front line that have to fight that. So it's very easy to understand where they're psychologically going to be in a different place. And the academy is going to take them potentially from pools of people that were just like Nick, that don't have interpersonal skills. So I went to shake the hand of one of the deputies, and he told me, his first instinct was to tell me, I don't shake hands. I was like, okay. But I wasn't going to accept that because I was trying to at least say, all right, this is how you need to be able to recognize who is friend, who is foe. You are not operating in a hostile territory. You are operating inside of your community. Look around here. Is this the ghetto? No, it is not. All right. It is not a place where you're getting called out, where there's a whole lot of stabbings and beatings, and people are very typically have a good relationship with our police forces and security forces. And I think that's very important to reinforce that interaction between police and the community, so they can really truly identify, who is friend and who is foe. So I detail all this stuff for them and the things that I've come up with, so they can take a little bit of the pressure off the detective that might be running down something real, or like a robbery, a murder, a rape. These things do happen. And as our communities get bigger and bigger and bigger, and surely the police forces are dealing with the same kind of financial stresses as we all are, it's very important to make their work easier. So he wouldn't shake my hand, and then his first instinct was to tell me that he shakes with his left hand, was to lie to me. Now, if a police officer's first instinct is to lie to you, that does not inspire a lot of confidence. And that they can teach you everything in the academy, apparently, aside from etiquette. So, I just think those are some things that we need to be aware of moving into the future. That it's really going to require cooperation much more so than before, and it will make many hands will make the load lighter. And of course, you know, our security forces being what they are, they're, you know, it's not really, I'm not being very fair because I understand how they do policing, and it does make sense, but, you know, hopefully their commanding officers will eventually teach them a little bit more about etiquette, because there's a learning curve, and they were being observed. So, you know, no harm, no foul, but I just think that that's kind of something everybody should be aware of when interacting with their police forces, and whether that be, you know, local administrators, sheriffs, and then the lieutenants and everything going all the way down, about community policing. Anyway, so didn't get all the way to the assessments and things today, but it at least brought you an assessment of a different type, so you can understand where I'll be going in another episode regarding, you know, what's going to happen come October, because there's other things to look at. So it's been Hank. It's been a pleasure. Good to see you. Thanks for joining me, and I will catch you on the flip side.